Morning to everyone. I want to thank Rainmaker, allied member and a great supporter of CHTA, for participating in this program and bringing it to our membership today. Rainmaker Group is a key thought leader globally in many parts of the world in the hospitality industry. I believe they're a network of over 5,500 hotels in 110 countries. Their reach is considerable. And their commitment to intelligence and technology and data and how we utilize that is unmatched in the industry. And that's what we're going to get into today. Fundamentally, how do we utilize the data you have on your guests to drive revenues? How do you get an ROI on what you already have, the information, the intelligence that you already have and have access to? So we're really pleased to be joined by two of Rainmaker's top people who can share some information with us on I believe we got Mike Cowles with us, who's their Chief Commercial Officer. Mike has a strong background in both the technology side as well as the people side of the business, and getting technology and people to converge strategically is key to success in our ever-changing kind of environment. He's joined as well by Dan Skodol, who is VP for Revenue Analytics with Rainmaker. Dan is responsible for researching and designing enhancements and innovations within their hospitality product suite side and supporting thought leadership topics and studies via analytics. So without further, I'd like to turn it over to Dan so we can jump right into this.
Thank you, Sprague. This is Mike Cowles. I actually will start here. Dan's going to carry us through the back end of the presentation, where he shares a lot of anecdotal stories that he's built up over many years in the hospitality business. But I wanted to just start out with a quick introduction, go a little deeper on what Rainmaker is, and then jump into the fundamental concepts that we're going to be talking about here in a very simple way, and then hand it off to Dan to kind of take us home. So Rainmaker, as Frank mentioned, we on a normal day innovate and sell and deploy for customers a suite of cloud software applications that help to maximize hotel revenue. We focus on hotels, resorts, and casinos with essentially 4 different elements of the product offering. One is transient revenue optimization. There's a group revenue optimization tool, competitive rate shopping function, and a comprehensive hotel business intelligence platform that kind of wraps it all up. So that's what Rainmaker does. We're in our 20th year here today, great customer base, really excited to be spending some more time as of recently in the Caribbean. And today we're not going to talk about the products, but rather some of the concepts that our products help our customers navigate. And again, I'm going to frame it up with some sort of simple basics to get everyone thinking in the right direction, and then Dan's going to walk us through a whole lot of useful anecdotal stories that he's built up over the years. So first of all, it's all about supply and demand. We're going to keep it real simple here, even though it's not that simple. You'll see as we get into the details after my section here that there's a lot of dynamic to both the supply and the demand. Neither hotel supply or demand really are easy to represent with one simple curve, but that's what I'm going to do in the subsequent slide. In fact, I'm going to even leave the supply curve off of here and just speak to it on a single demand curve, but try and drive home some points about how you need to be thinking about your supply and your demand, and specifically getting us towards segmenting your demand as a key first step in being able to truly do revenue management effectively. So first of all, supply. This one, I think every hotel has an understanding of this and has mechanisms in place to accommodate it. So your supply isn't one homogeneous set of things. Of course, you have in most environments, there are suites versus rooms. There may be an ocean view versus a garden view versus a parking garage view. And depending on the environment, other amenities are important and represent distinct characterization from one room to another room. So the supply varies considerably. We're going to sort of simplify that concept for now and jump to talking about demand, where I think it's not as common to think of demand in a segmented way as it pertains to revenue management. We don't see all hotels, kind of already down that path in a thoughtful way. So most customers, most hotel properties do have a segmentation from a business perspective and how you articulate and report on and sort of track your business's progress, but that may not be the ideal way to segment from a revenue management perspective. And I think that point will become clear as I wrap up here and as Dan goes through his portion of the presentation. So different ways you would look at your demand. So booking channels, I think this one is fairly obvious. People, use OTAs, people use tour operators, there's direct bookings, all of which have different reasons why you'd want to use them and different associated costs. And I bring up cost now to point out what we're talking about here is often labeled revenue management, but ultimately, if you're doing it well, you're getting into profit optimization. So not only maximizing the revenue, but understanding how different elements of business that you take in to get the revenue perform from a margin perspective. Obviously, that's a common dialogue in the hotel industry of late with regards to booking channels and the variable costs that are there. But another one that requires potentially more data and systems and a little more maturity is understanding repeat customers or known demographics that behave a certain way while on your property. Gaming environments are probably the most advanced as it pertains to this. You think about, just jump right to Vegas casinos, do a very good job and have for a long time on their player clubs and tracking almost every behavior that happens on site in a property. And by doing that, they can then set prices and release availability to their most profitable customers, or said another way, in certain times represent their property as being sold out, perhaps even though they have rooms left, because they know that they still have a forecast that says high value people are still going to turn up between now and day of check-in. So understanding repeat customers, or at least demographics, potentially country of origin, and how they perform while on your property is another potentially interesting input. And then the last two are sort of tied to that. A particular individual on your property has a propensity to spend, whether that's a gaming thing or a spa thing or a food and beverage thing. If you can understand that, and especially if you can then know who that person is when they try to book a subsequent trip, that can be very valuable. And there's a flip side to this too, which is propensity to consume, particularly prominent concept in all-inclusive, where you have taken a fixed revenue and attributed to a service or an offering on your property, but the cost of serving a particular individual could be highly variable from one to another. So again, being able to tie that to a known repeat customer or a demographic or even a booking channel that yields you more profitable or less profitable guests, and being able to control your pricing and availability based on that is one of the key tenets to where we're trying to go here. If we can, yeah. So really what we're getting at is the need to segment your demand. And again, Dan's going to get into real thoughts on how this works in a hotel environment, but understand that not all segments are created equal, both from when they book, when they're on site, how they perform, from revenue beyond just the room revenue, and in the case of all-inclusive and particularly the cost profile that guests might represent. So getting back to the demand curve here, we said we were going to keep it simple, but I just want to give you kind of a time-based view of how it might happen in reality to set the stage for the anecdotal stuff coming up here. So you may very well book early on in your booking window a piece of relatively lower price. We represent here. You may early on take a bulk of business, let's say through an OTA or direct booking channel that's a midpoint from a price perspective and gives you a nice base to get your pace and pickup and your occupancy feeling good. When you're a good ways out from time of check-in, you may later take something at a lower price point that perhaps is a tour group operator that steadily helps you fill in your occupancy as you get closer to the check-in date. But we want to make sure, if you can know that you have high value demand that's going to turn up later in the cycle, that you don't sell everything at a lower price point. again, Dan's going to speak to this dynamic, but in some cases, it's not just about setting price based on your various segments, but ensuring availability to your higher value segments, which oftentimes needs to be held open until fairly late, potentially uncomfortably late in a booking curve. So just to drive the point home, you're actually getting your revenue, not at one price point times your entire quantity, but across your different types of supply, whether it's rooms or suites, at various points in time in your booking curve and from various segments of your demand, and optimizing that mix is really what this is all about. So I guess the last point here is if you have an appropriate segmentation for your demand and you're able to forecast by those segments, you are able to optimize how you price and when you present availability to your various segments, and therefore ensure that you have the most valuable guests in your property at any given point in time. So I promise to keep it simple. It's one demand curve here and a couple of rectangles, but wanted to set the stage kind of for what the fundamentals are that Dan's going to walk us through in a actual operational hotel environment, some of his observations over the many years that he's been doing this. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dan.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to start out by talking to things that you want to consider when putting a segmentation scheme together for revenue management. So you may already have some segmentation in place for reporting purposes, and we might call that business segmentation. This doesn't always translate ideally into revenue management segments. You may have an employee discount segment that you might do a very small handful of rooms here and there, and certainly from a reporting perspective, that's something you want to split out from your main segments. But not only is it not very effective when it comes to revenue management, and certainly difficult to forecast these small segments, but it almost becomes trivial when it comes to factoring into any relevant decision making and tactics that you're going to apply at your property. That said, when you're assembling your segmentation for the purposes of revenue management, the first and foremost, the primary consideration is to be able to forecast as accurately and effectively as possible. So you'll want to make sure that you've got enough volume of bookings within your segmentation scheme, and that can often involve aggregating certain similar segments together before you forecast. Some of the distinctions that segmentation can capture, and certainly that you'd want to capture as much as possible, booking patterns. So if one segment tends to book early and maybe rapidly, and another segment tends to book towards the last minute, certainly you'd want to keep those separate and have separate forecasts for those different segments. If your segments have considerably different values, if you're measuring that in revenue or profit or however, if you've got a low value segment, you would tend to want to try to make that distinct from a high value segment. A third distinction that you want to capture is length of stay and different distributions. And so if you have segments that tend to stay shorter stays and other segments that tend to stay longer, those can also be separate. And I'll be coming back later on to an interesting length of stay example that will show the importance of understanding length of stay and figuring it into your decision making. And then finally, the seasonality, over the course of the year, if you have certain segments that tend to come during your peak and certain segments that might fill in kind of some of the gaps during your shoulder or off seasons, you would tend to want to separate those segments. But again, I think the most important consideration is just making sure that you've got the critical mass of volume in each segment for an effective forecast. Some examples of different segmentation schemes. Mike actually alluded to segmenting by booking channel, and probably the most obvious, and certainly something that you're most likely tracking within your property management system via some source code or likewise. So segmenting by booking channel, being OTA or tour or direct channels, and making a distinction based on what you understand as the costs of those different channels, so that you understand when to take more business from your maybe higher cost your more expensive channels when you really need it, and when you might be in a position where you can maximize your cheapest channels, and try to deter or discourage taking business from the more expensive channels. Going along with this, certainly there's a value attached to each of these booking channels, but you can segment directly by value, and just if you have a good sense of what this is at a customer level, you can just stratify your segments by that known value, high, medium, or low, or however many segments you can actually build based on the size of your hotel. This is very good for casinos and other resort atmospheres or resort environments where you've got a high amount of ancillary spend that you're able to track. And so that, so take the, example again, you have customers that, might game and just spend a few dollars, and you may have some very high-end customers that are worth thousands of dollars, and then everywhere in between. And so certainly from a revenue management perspective, it's very important to understand the distinction and how many customers you've got coming from each of those segments. And so in addition to the revenue that might be generated, as to the extent you can track both revenues and costs at an individual level, or at least assign different profit margins to different revenue streams and different customer segments. This obviously gets you, as Mike said, more towards type situation where you're optimizing profit, which kind of goes above and beyond just simply looking at revenues. And then finally, as an example, you can even segment by geography. So if point of sale, if where these customers are originating from, certainly different geographical regions might have customers that share similar characteristics in terms of spending, in terms of just behavior when they're on property, definitely value, and so forth. So another option would be to segment based on their origin. And certainly these can be combined, or maybe mixed and matched, if you will. You can do more than one segmentation scheme as long as you've got enough business coming through each segment that you can build an effective forecast. A lot on the slide here, but just some specific examples of certain segmentation schemes. So here in the upper left, you've got somewhat of a combination of geography and channel. So you can sort of see the different places of origin, but also you've got FIT separated from wholesale. You've got the Gulf countries in their own segment, and so forth. And then kind of going down on the left side, you've got more of a traditional market segmentation, and here's only 5 segments, which might be suitable for perhaps a smaller property, but you've got direct, travel agent, wholesale, sort of the basic distribution channels there. The bottom left, you have last room availability separated out. Maybe that's a key segment, key factor for this particular property. And then you've got sort of a different looking market segmentation following those LRA segments. Maybe a slightly bigger property with more segments. Notice that at the bottom they do lump employee and comp and other into one, so they're doing some aggregation there. And then finally, at the bottom right, this might be what you'd see typical for a casino property with a value-based segmentation, using the non-room value and just setting breakpoints for each segment there. And it looks like maybe there's some timeshare element here too, because they've got a complementary and ownership segment down there too. Just here's a visual of geographic breakout, and just kind of looking at how the mix changes. Actually, the mix of channel, FIT, wholesale, et cetera, changes based on the point of origin. So let's now talk about yielding a little bit. And so here, and again, this can be really based on any type of segmentation, but let's just say that we identify 3 segments, and for the sake of simplicity, one of these is a high value segment for us, one of these is of medium value, and then the third segment is a low value. And in the simplest fashion, you would prefer to fill your rooms going in order from highest value segment to lowest value segment. So let's say in this case, you've got a hotel of 200 rooms. You've got plenty of room for all of the high and medium value guests that want a room. So all those guests get in. But notice that you've got more than enough from your low segment to fill the rest of the hotel. So the idea here is to make sure you're taking just enough of these low value guests to fill your remaining rooms, and making sure that none of the low value guests take the place of a higher value guest. We call that displacement. And when that happens, that's lost opportunity to have put a better, more valuable customer in your hotel rooms. So certainly this is often easier said than done, as guests do not book in the order of their value. So your high value guests, if they all booked first, followed by your medium guests booking later, and then finally your low value guests, that would certainly be ideal, as you could just sell out your hotel upon the last low value guest booking. And this speaks to the importance of having a good forecast at a segment level. So in many cases, those lowest value guests might often book earliest. Certainly in my experience, that was very much the case in the casino world, where they in fact knew that they needed to call as soon as they received an offer in order to get access to the hotel, whereas our high-end casino guests tended to wait until the last minute to book. So again, the importance of the forecast here. So your decisions on how many guests from each segment to accept should be based on a forecast of your future demand that's still to come. And then ultimately the goal is to understand how many rooms to preserve for those highest value, most profitable guests. So here's an example. We've changed our booking pattern here a bit, where we've got a lot of that low-end business booking early on in the process. And in fact, if we were to forecast accurately, we would actually see that I can only fit 80 of my low-value guests in my hotel, and I'd want to fill the rest of the hotel with my high and medium value guests, the other 120 rooms. And so 60 days out is where I reach that point where I've booked 80 of these low value guests. If I keep on taking any of these low value guests past that point, I'll incur some displacement, and so that they'd be taking the place of a higher value guest. So what I'd like to do here, and you can see there's somewhat of a inflection point around 60 days, and this is the point at which I would stop accepting rooms from this segment to make sure that I get get all of my high and medium value guests in. So this is the point at which I would put controls in place in the form of pricing, availability controls, shutting off channels if I have the ability to do that, in order to preserve the remaining rooms for my higher value segments. So we'll come back to length of stay here. So it's very important to take length of stay into consideration when yielding your rooms. segments can have different distributions that are important to measure. So as I said earlier, you have one segment that tends to stay for shorter lengths of stay. You may have other segments that tend to stay longer, and this might not be consistent with their overall value. And it's important to understand the effect of this on your revenue performance on the outcome. So here's a simple example. We're taking out the medium segment now. We've just got a high value segment and a low value segment, and we see that we can get a really strong amount of business. We can fill almost all of our hotel with this high value business for 2 nights on Tuesday and Wednesday of a given week, and let's say that business is worth $250 a night. We have low value business that can fill in the rest of the time, but the low value business is actually a 7-night stay. So we've got enough room. We can get 40 more of those customers in on Tuesday and Wednesday to stay the rest of the week, and that let's say they're worth $100 per night. However, and I can go back to my forecast and see I actually have 100 of these low value customers that want these 7-night stays, and if I don't have any other demand, then I can't fill the rest of my days a week because I'm those no more customers can get Tuesday or Wednesday. So if they can't get Tuesday or Wednesday, they certainly can't get the rest of the week because they need that 7-night stay. So what I would prefer to do is understand that and anticipate that, knowing that I have 100 rooms worth of demand from that low segment wanting to stay 7 nights. And it would almost seem counterintuitive at the time, but I would actually want and need to curtail some of that high-end business that only wants 2 nights on the Tuesday and Wednesday, so that I can get all 100 rooms from that low value segment that wants to stay 7 nights. So very important to know the forecast. And in fact, if you look at the revenue impact here, obviously certainly Tuesday and Wednesday will be great nights on the example on the left. But if we just tally up our revenue result on the left side, we see $108,000. But on the right side, getting all of our longer lengths of stay in, we actually are better off. We see $120,000. So again, understanding demand, not just at a value level, but also a length of stay level. Going to wrap up with 5 tips regarding best practices on collecting and managing data that hopefully will be helpful to you. Number 1 is to tap into as many of your operational systems as possible. So certainly the primary source of data is going to be your PMS. That's where that's where all of your reservation level data. You may even store some customer data, in terms of just folio charges and so forth in your PMS. But also, if you have a separate database, maybe you have, if you're a casino, you might have a casino system that is capturing the worth of your casino guests, and any other of your systems at your properties can be very good data sources when it comes to revenue management. Number 2 is ultimately help your customers help you, and what this refers to is if you need certain data from your customers, you may need to provide incentives for them to give it to you. And certainly the best example that I can think of that is again the casino environment, where customers know that they only receive their comps and other freebies if they sign up and use their membership card. And that casino membership card is what ultimately allows the casino to track all the necessary data and understand everything that a customer does in the casino. And so that's I think the best example. Certainly things like capturing folio data, having customers charge things back to their room is a very convenient way to have a lot of ancillary spend data right there in your PMS. So thinking about ways to provide incentives for customers to do that. And another example that actually comes to mind here are cruise ships, which almost are the ideal world of data capture, where really the entire cruise is cashless and you're using your card, not just as your room key, but as the means to charge everything you do and buy on that cruise back to your stateroom and back to that shipboard account. And what the cruise line ends up with is a very robust set of data on everything that passenger is doing while they're on the cruise. So think about how you might be able to learn and adopt some of these practices that are in related industries. Third is, and this is something I think we alluded to a few times, not all revenue is created equal. And what that refers to is taking into account margins on different revenue streams. Certainly rooms revenue margin is going to be very different from food and beverage revenue margin, and spa and golf and everything else that might take place on your property. So if you are looking at and tracking different revenue streams and you're really setting out to optimize profit for your property, calculating and understanding the margins at a revenue stream level is important. 4 is to understand those channel costs as thoroughly as possible. And even if this is a simple back of the envelope, trying to calculate things like net rates and GDS fees and any kind of marketing expenses that might be related to direct channels, just kind of doing an allocation of those costs as accurately as you can, just to understand if you are perhaps segmenting by channel, how those channel costs and what those I should say how profitable those channels are for you. And then finally, it's fine, it's okay to draw inferences where you may have some gaps in the data. I definitely prescribe to the idea that putting something, some assumption or some number in place rather than assuming that value is just 0 is preferable. So that you can continue to, as you gather more data and learn more, refine those assumptions and maybe eventually fill in with actual data once you're able to collect it. And I think that's what we've got, and we're very happy to take some questions at this point.
Thank you. Okay, so we're ready to start answering a few questions. Again, if you've been listening throughout the presentation and you have a few questions popped up, go ahead, go to your chat box and submit some questions. But I have some here for you already. And let's see, gentlemen, whichever one of you would like to take this one, let me know. If you want to increase your direct bookings, which are of course more value to a hotelier, how do you go about focusing on that, increasing direct bookings, using this kind of data?
Yeah, I'll take that. So, first, obviously, I think it is important to, as it relates to what we just presented, important to understand, what demand is there. I think it is the nature of some markets, some hotels where, their guests tend to come primarily through third parties, and then they're, certainly benefiting from the marketing spend that those third party channels, maybe the OTAs or otherwise, are doing to attract business, and that's kind of what they're getting, for what they ultimately spend in commission or net rate. As far as direct bookings, obviously it's going to require some things, putting some dollars after to go after that. I think we can look at what some of the major chains have been doing in the U.S., the Hiltons of the world, where they incent customers to book direct via a modest discount in exchange for signing up for their loyalty program. I think that works for some, but not others. Certainly, being visible through search engines and being doing the right kinds of marketing campaigns around driving business directly to your own property's website. I guess most of all, and maybe this is my word of caution is use, and again, kind of going back to understanding these channel costs as well as possible. Make sure that you are allocating what should be allocated to ultimately what you're getting through your direct channel. It's very easy to see, okay, I don't pay any commissions on bookings that come through my website, but ultimately that traffic and those eyeballs have to come from somewhere, and often takes some spending to go after those customers. So I think it starts to be somewhat of a fine line between profitability across channels, and that you really want to make sure that you're looking at in the right way. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just from a broader context, one thing we've seen in the last couple of years, and in fact, we just came off of our user conference, Optimize, last week down in Miami, and there was a lot of discussion on this. It's definitely related. It's hard to talk about revenue management these days without talking about marketing as well. And we see, certainly in North America or U.S. markets, we see that the organizations coming together in many cases, literally organizationally in some cases, others are taking steps towards that, but the importance of sharing data in both directions. So helping the marketing function understand which of your segments are most profitable can help them target what it is they do to try and draw people to your website or send out promotions to a targeted subset of folks. And vice versa, the revenue teams often don't understand traction or traffic that is happening that doesn't result in a booking. So to the extent the marketing team is trying to go and attract a certain segment and they're getting to the website, but not actually pulling the trigger on a booking, that's information that could be valuable to revenue teams, which often don't see anything until bookings actually happen. So a lot of dialogue. We could do a whole webinar, I'm sure, on the synergies that should be there between marketing and revenue management, but I think you got to look at it holistically to really move the needle on the getting more of the right segments of business, because each team knows some things that the other would benefit from knowing, I think, in the overall strategy.
I'll just add one last thing I'll just add one more thing to round that answer out. One thing that is being talked about a lot, one kind of current trend in the industry, that I think a lot of industry players see as a key to driving direct bookings is the concept of personalization, and the notion that providing a personalized experience, both a personalized booking experience and a personalized stay experience, that they really can only ultimately get through booking direct, is going to be the future of driving direct bookings.
Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, we have another question here. I'm a small boutique hotel with a restaurant and a spa, no casino. How do I use this data to increase my non-room spend?
I'll start with that one also. And I think I mentioned just being able to make sure, first and foremost, that you're able to tap into the data that might be available through say point of sale systems, or if you have a spa management system. If you can attribute revenue back to your overnight guests to basically make that connection and say, I know that guests from my direct channel tend to spend more in my book me through an OTA. And again, kind of just even if it's just making a high level estimate as to what that difference is, then you can start to understand kind of the added value you may actually get by driving more direct bookings, or if you do have the ability to open and close channels at will.
Hello?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay,
Yeah.
I thought we lost you there for a minute. I wasn't sure if you're
sorry.
okay.
Should I continue? Should I continue? Should I continue?
Please.
So yeah, making sure that you're only getting your most profitable customers into your and your biggest spenders ultimately into your hotel. And then aside from that, there are things you can do in those outlets, specifically to make sure you're and just kind of looking at those outlets as standalones, and saying, what can I do to make sure that I'm maximizing my restaurant revenue or my spa revenue, and applying some of the same principles to those outlets as you might apply to the rooms. I'll just give one interesting aspect of restaurants that's somewhat unique is understanding if you have the right table mix. And looking at you might fill your restaurant all the time. You may fill all the tables. You might not be filling all the seats. And so, looking at, the party sizes that are coming into your restaurant and understanding, do I have too many 4 tops that might be occupied mainly by parties of 2? And so I've got 2 empty seats there which are lost revenue opportunities every time I sit a party of 2 down at a table for 4. And certainly the ability to fit more 2 tops in that restaurant because they're smaller. So just one example of tactics and strategies that you can apply specifically to a restaurant and even specifically to a spa type of application.
Yeah, this is Mike. I would add one other thing that has come up recently is like offers and promotions, things to tie the room to the ancillary revenue. Like, it all comes back to having the data. So like if you have the data on your guests and the ancillary spend in spa and restaurant, and you can correlate to something that you can know at time of booking, whether it's a particular channel that yields you guests that on average spend more, or a country of origin or some other demographic that you can know, which isn't always easy. That's interesting. But there is another discussion that is top of mind is sometimes you can use the data. To the extent you have the data, you could do A/B testing on offers. So for example, there was a premise out there that at least at some properties proved out to be true, which is directionally, if you were to give a $20 credit to a food and beverage or a spa outlet, you might get your customers to engage and ultimately spend, $120 for a net $100 of revenue to you, whereas without a $20 credit, you might on average get $50 of spend in that outlet. So A/B testing, I would say, on offers that maybe seem counterintuitive, but if you give a little something away, you might actually ultimately get more net revenue. You can't know unless you have the data set up and you can do the testing, but we've got a number of customers who are playing around with concepts like that at this point.
Okay, we have one more question here. Does it make sense to sell cheaper rooms to booking agents in peak periods only to maintain loyalty?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Just following
okay.
with that. So I think it's something that can be evaluated through the right analysis. If those same agents are, you have to kind of define what loyalty means. If those same agents are giving you business in your low periods, there's certainly value in that. And I think you can quantify, what am I possibly diluting in my peak period by doing business with this particular agent, and that obviously hopefully is more than offset by the incremental business that agent brings you in your softer periods. So I think that's the most basic, analysis I would do. If there's a different, definition of loyalty that might require looking at sort of a lifetime value type of aspect of that business coming in, that's somewhat different and perhaps more complex. But at the very basic level, just kind of understanding what they're doing for you, how they're benefiting you when you most need it, and then just taking the cost of that dilution into account in the peak.
Okay. All right, and this is going to be then, we're going to go to our last question so we can wrap it up. Is there any way that that we can compare the performance of my hotel versus another one? Does Rainmaker offer benchmarking of any kind?
Want to speak to that, Mike?
Yeah, sure. So I would say, I guess the formal answer is we don't have a formal production benchmark program right now. We are investigating it. I think it's a direction we will probably head in soon. Having said that, we regularly will look at comp sets and peer groups and pull together a sort of a one-off essentially benchmark on a property as part of an engagement with a customer. So we don't today formally put all of our customers or even prospects into a benchmark program that has a regular cadence to it. So it's more of a one-off, but we'd be happy to pull some data and look at your property relative to a peer set, which might also include analyzing your comp set to see if we think you have the right one. What you come up with and what we come up with may or may not match, and some of that comes out from the data exercise of actually doing this type of benchmark. So happy to do it. It is today, unfortunately, kind of a one-off exercise versus a programmatic thing.
Okay. All right. Any final remarks, gentlemen? We've reached the end of the webinar. Thank you so much. Anything you'd like to close with?
Yeah, that we appreciate the opportunity. It's exciting for us to think about getting more formally engaged in the Caribbean market, and so appreciate the opportunity to speak, and happy to broker any follow-on conversations that people want to have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, so as you can see, Mike and Dan's information is on the screen. Both their emails are on there, and we will, of course, share this video on our website. It will be emailed to you directly, as well as the PowerPoint presentation. Any additional questions that you have for these gentlemen, you can reach out to them directly. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk to you. And thank you once again for joining the webinar. And we will see you soon. Hopefully, we will see everyone at Chief, Taste of the Caribbean, and Caribbean 305 that are coming up in June. If you have any questions regarding that, go to our website, www.caribbeanhotelandtourism.com, and we will see you in June in Miami. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mike and Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks.